Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Bratt from Eurogamer, and it is my pleasure today to welcome you to this session for Total War Warhammer 2. We've got a couple of guys here from Creative Assembly to talk to you about the game's narrative and something that's quite unique to Warhammer 2, which is the way it's approaching its endgame. So if you could please join me in giving a big, warm welcome to Andy Hall and Al Bickham.
Hello. Thank you all very much for coming. Lovely to be back for another EGX dev session. Warhammer 2 is out next week, which is pretty exciting, pretty nail-biting for us. And today we're going to talk about what's different in Warhammer 2, really, what's fundamentally different about the campaign and how it works differently. So when we set out to make Warhammer 2, we had some pretty big aims about the game. Obviously, we wanted more monsters and more magic and mayhem, more Warhammer, essentially. And obviously even greater variety in the faction style, the way they play the different gameplay styles, their uniqueness. So yeah, today Andy and I are going to talk about narrative, tension, and the endgame, using the Skaven as a bit of an example as to how we're working that stuff into the campaign. So we've made some really cool changes in how a Total War campaign can work, and this is something of an experiment for us. Now, this affects all the playable races. It affects all the races. However you play as, you'll have a very unique experience. So we're just going to run a quick video now as a reminder of who those races are in the game.
Peggy 16.
Love that trailer, always gives me chills.
Yeah. Also very nice to see the Hell Pit Abomination in the game finally as well.
Queek's little laugh at the end though, it's very Queek.
Very Queek. So, when we came to start developing the game, our first principle was that a sequel really should not just be more of the same. So we got us to thinking about how we could improve the formula, how we could improve the Total War formula to increase that level of immersion and offer the player really a more dynamic kind of campaign game. So looking back to previous Total War games, a lot of the tension and excitement exists in the kind of early to late mid-game section when you're still in the process of establishing your empire and stabilizing your economy and teching up and getting to high-tier armies and that sort of thing. But you get to this sort of tipping point where your empire is so big that nobody can really sort of challenge you anymore, and you end up sort of Bob Rossing your way across the map, painting, region by region. And as fun as that is, the challenge level starts disappearing around there. So in Warhammer 2, we're trying a different kind of endgame, essentially. And on your journey to that end game, you'll find it shot through with peaks and troughs of tension, of gameplay tension throughout it. And the idea is we're culminating in an epic sort of massive, epic endgame experience, which we won't talk about too much because it's quite spoilery. And alongside that, supporting that, is a whole lot more storytelling. So I'm handing you over to Andy Hall, who's our lead writer, to give us a bit more explanation about that.
Okay, so the first thing we should talk about is the Vortex, which is a big, magic, swirly plug hole of death that is in the middle of Ulfwan. And the reason we chose this MacGuffin, so to speak, is because all the races are aware of it, and they can all use it in very specific ways. Now, the end game may be the destination they want to all be at, but actually, their stories are very different. And this also, for players, allows you some great replayability, because each story for each race is very different. So let's talk about how we kind of introduce that. And we've got a little guy to show you guys. Here he is. This is a Skaven scribe, Sneak Scratch It. He's very cute for a Skaven. Our movie director, Lawrence, he wanted to make him even cuter, but for me, there's a bit too much Sylvanian families in there and not enough Skaven as it is. So why him? Well, we wanted each race to kind of be approachable. You know, even if you're a demonic rat man, we wanted you to be able to, you know, sympathize with these characters. And also, why are we not using the legendary lords in our movies? Why is it these kind of secondary protagonists? And that kind of brings up an interesting point, in that Total War is a sandbox game. You can do anything you want within the bounds and framework of the game. But at some points, we need the narrative to be at certain places. If you're playing Queek and you're dead, for instance, or in your capital, or on the other side of the map, we still need to be able to tell the story at certain points. So we've introduced these kind of these characters to do that. He's one half of the team. There's also a Grey Seer as well. We're going to introduce him now.
Under the world, they chitter and plan, watching, waiting. When they emerge, it is a nightmare vision. The Skaven, a ravenous horde of verminous ratmen.
You do 2 seconds before you start your next go.
They gnaw at the roots of the world like an infected wound. They mean to rule over ruins, for such is the will of their god, the great horned rat. Only the island home of the High Elves has remained unscathed. And at its center is the great Vortex. A swirling maelstrom that siphons chaos from the world. The Skaven covet its vast power with envious, beady red eyes. The twin-tailed comet is oft seen as an omen, but this time its wake has disturbed the winds of magic. In the secret halls of the Under-Empire, the Council of 13 has gathered. A time to scheme of opportunity.
I killed dwarf things in Pillar City. No! Clan wars go to Southlands. Hunt for Warpstone. Moors are puppet minion. Pestilence infest Lastria. Yes. But all Warpstone for Council plan. Come, scribe slave. Work to do. Comet makes elf things weak. Council wants power of the Vortex. Just as prophecy demands. So it true. You read markings on the black pillar. Then you know we must find the Screaming One. Find out how to control the Vortex. Oh yes, Master. But a large tribute of warpstone will that demon require if we summon him? Return to your assigned plan. Harvest warpstone. Yes, most precipitous of masters. And flee yourself, your impertinence. It will be done, your worship.
So that's a settle. But you run the risk here with a sandbox campaign and almost a separate narrative of why should the player care? And how we kind of intersect between the gameplay and the movies themselves is it's going to be these characters that are going to be delivering you these missions. It's not just some cold piece of text saying go over there and kill that army. It will be Sneak pleading with you, asking, begging you to go over there. Or maybe the Grey Seer will come over there and order you and call you a coward. So that kind of starts immersing you in the game. And that's how the narrative kind of intersects.
So after, that's obviously the intro video to the Skaven. So that sets you up for your next objective in the Skaven campaign. And then it hands over to the game. That's where you start playing, the campaign game proper. So the advisor pops up here, and he then gives you the kind of mechanical nuts and bolts of how to carry out those narrative objectives. So he tells you how to collect warpstone, which is the Skaven's resource, the currency they need to power their rituals and to do the will of the screaming one. Now, once you've gathered enough of this ritual, you can see a line, a counter along the top there. You'll gather your ritual currency, and you'll get to the first node. Those nodes along there are the rituals, and once you fill up to the first one, you can engage your first ritual. And this is what moves the story on. This is what drives the story forwards. Now, when you do that, a ritual is essentially a large-scale spell, and it takes 10 turns to complete. And what it does is it binds 3 of your settlements to the Great Vortex. It magically intertwines them with the Great Vortex. You'll see big bands of power connecting them to the Great Vortex. And in those 10 turns, you can expect to be under siege. Chaos will slip into the world and attack you, and it will try and attack those settlements. And within those 10 turns, if you lose any of those settlements, then you fail the ritual, and you have to kick it off again. But if you complete the ritual, you're successful, and you manage to hold on to your territories, you'll then see the results of that, and you'll get some more narrative delivered. You get the story moves on. So, for example, once as Skaven you've completed the first ritual, this is what you then get.
The ritual enacted, the skies over the world shatter, exciting the Grey Seer while his scribe cowered, for he knew their next destination. Deep in the fetid jungle swamplands was the lair of the Screaming One, summoned to this plane by the ritual. Not risking his whiskers, the master sent his minion into the lair. Within, the Vermin Lord awaited. The Screaming One spoke of the Vortex at the heart of the Elf Thing's island continent. It was vulnerable due to the comet's passing, ripe for Skaven interference. An engine of doom and curses must be constructed and empowered by 4 more rituals. The Vortex will be bound to this machine on completion of the final ritual, giving Skaven untold power. The Screaming One granted the lowly scribe an object encased in iron. The scribe eyed it greedily, but the demon demanded the gift handed to Grey Seer Valskreek. And a final gift, rituals of fabrication to build the machine. The scribe's adopted clan would begin construction at once. But warpstone is needed to power the rituals, and False Creek already grows impatient.
Okay.
So, the screaming one there's a bit of an Easter egg. Some Warhammer fans may know his identity. I'm going to say no more. But in short, the rituals, as you perform them, you will see progress being made. But they're also air excuse, air chance to basically give you a narrative delivery system. That way, we're not putting the player on rails. This isn't a short narrative on rails experience. This is still Total War. This is up to you. You can, create these massive settlements. You can go all over the world and invade. But at some point, you're going to have to hit these nodes, these thresholds, unlike in previous campaigns. And therefore, we can give you a story, not just at the beginning or at the end, but all the way through. And that way, we can kind of give you and push on some narrative tension throughout. Because there's always something to do. There's always a story agenda for you to take on.
Yeah. And that narrative tension is reflected by peaks and troughs of gameplay tension as well. As you engage in these rituals and you kick them off, it's like I said, you're going to be under siege for 10 turns, and those rituals get more and more challenging as time goes on. Your first ritual is a bit of a training ritual. Basically, you get an experience of a couple of Chaos armies coming to attack you, but it's reasonably easy to fend them off. But it gives you an expectation of what to expect in the future. And later on, you'll be doing rituals where more chaos comes at you, but then the other races who are also racing to get control of the Vortex as well and trying to achieve rituals of their own, these guys are going to start sending intervention armies at you and trying to militarily shut your rituals down at the same time as chaos. So, what this leads to is a new sense of pace in a Total War game. And on a regular Total War game, the pace and the tension come from the actions that you engage in as a player. You engage in wars with other factions, and then suddenly you might get yourself into a difficult position, and it's really exciting. But this way, we aid the generation, and the pace rises and falls and rises and falls up to that kind of big end game conclusion there. So, again, we're not going to tell you what that end game thing is. That's for players, but they'll be able to play it next week anyway. So yeah. That's kind of how it works.
I think the race is very compelling. It draws people in. I've seen many playtests now where people focus so much on the race, they actually forget to start managing their empire.
Yeah.
But of course, all this talk of narrative and stuff is great, but there are still plenty of Total War players out there, I bet, that just want a pure Total War, pure sandbox experience.
And for those players, a short time after launch, a few weeks after launch, we're going to be releasing Mortal Realms, which is... It's a whole new campaign. It's something we've really been talking about since we first embarked on the Total War Warhammer trilogy. And this is the first step towards creating that grand holistic vision of the Warhammer Fantasy Battles world. So it'll be a campaign map which includes territory from the old world and the new world. And if you own both games, every single playable faction and race all combined into one giant sandbox experience. It won't have the Vortex mechanics in it. We're reserving that for the Warhammer 2 kind of core campaign, the Eye of the Vortex campaign. But in Mortal Empires, you'll be able to play as any of the factions that you own from either game in a massive, world-conquering sandbox, classic Total War experience. And that, of course, is going to grow again when we get to part 3 of the trilogy. We're thinking very long-term here. There's a lot more content to add over time, and ultimately we're building up towards a true representation of the entire Warhammer world in a way that no one's ever attempted before, which is pretty exciting.
Hopefully we'll see you on the battlefield.
Yes, indeed. That's kind of it from us for now. Like I said, the game's out next week on Thursday. In the meantime, I think we've got about 10 minutes. So if anybody's a microphone, yes, in fact, it's just been spotlit there. If anyone has any questions about the game, please do come up and ask us. Anyone? Oh, here's someone.
Hi guys. Just regarding the trilogy that you're on about and the multiplayer.
Sorry,
aspect.
could you go a bit closer to the mic? Thanks.
The trilogy that you've just been speaking about and the multiplayer aspect. Would that mean possibility of the games, even if you own each copy or singular of each copy, play multiplayer between 3? So if you owned Total Warhammer 1 but you haven't bought 2 or 3 yet, you could play against people who are playing 2 or 3?
No, so if you own Warhammer 1, you can play multiplayer with other Warhammer 1 owners. If you own both, you can play against either, effectively. So.
Right, okay, cool.
Right.
Thank you.
Nice to get free-for-all as well.
Hi, so you mentioned that with Total War specifically, a lot of storyline struggle comes from the fact that the player can basically do anything and go anywhere. So is there any way for the writer to support those emerging storylines the players will have in their specific playthroughs?
Okay.
What was that?
Sorry, can you speak up a little bit?
Yeah, sorry. I need to kind of step on my toes. So you mentioned that a lot of struggle you have as a writer is that the player basically can do anything, absolutely anything.
Yeah.
So is there anything the writer can do to support those emerging storylines and make them more interesting and more engaging?
Yeah, so we have missions, and our characters will deliver you those missions. You can ignore those if you like. You don't have to take those. But this is also a way of kind of rewarding you if you do play them. You're going to get the Vortex currency, which allows you to basically enter the race quicker and race to those rituals quicker. Is that answering your question? I think.
Kind of. Well, what I was meant more was around, is there any other smaller storylines you can play which, for example, are kind of triggered by certain conditions or certain races entering in a conflict with each other?
Yeah, well, actually, there are. We have treasure hunts on the map. The map is massive. And obviously, what we wanted to do is make sure it's very active, and you've got like shipwrecks and islands to discover and treasure hunts in ruins. And once you go in there, you effectively have, and these were great fun to write, weren't they?
Yeah, they're lots of fun.
These almost mini choose-your-own-adventure little stories that, you know, just a step back from world conquering, and you'll have to decide whether you want to take the sword from the skeleton, and maybe the skeleton will come alive and chop your head off. Maybe he'll just let you have the sword. So you've got plenty of those little narrative nuggets spread throughout, and that's shipwrecks and incidents as well, which are out.
Yeah, incidents, various dilemmas that pop up. And we've got quite a lot per race as well. We've got quite a lot of race-specific dilemmas and events and little missions that pop up, just to further differentiate those races and give you a different experience, give you a race-specific experience when you're playing different races. So the High Elves, for example, have quite a lot of very political dilemmas, you know, in terms of internal politics within the High Elves themselves. They love intrigue at court. They love nothing more than kind of political interplay and the sort of fun that they can have with that. So yeah, there's quite a lot of unique little storylines that you can follow, like short storylines you can follow outside of the context of the main campaign objective.
Skaven, of course, they have dilemmas when your lords are too loyal to you. They get worried that you're too loyal, because obviously you're planning something. So you'll get some dilemmas about what to do with this loyal person, whether you should stab him in the eye, take his tail, or give him some green cheese.
That's very Skaven.
That sounds awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Hey there. Are there any plans for introducing new game dynamics for the first game? When you have the grand campaign, you compare the second game compared to the first game in terms of races. Are we going to be introducing any new dynamics for the dwarves or for the men or anything like that?
Well, nothing specific for the old world races at the moment, but they also get what we're doing with the grand campaign, the Mortal Empires big map game, is we're taking a lot of the kind of new campaign as a whole, like mass of little new features in Warhammer 2 that weren't in Warhammer 1. And all the old world races will be able to play with those mechanics as well. So things like treasure hunting, things like
rogue armies,
encounters at sea, like giant storms, all that is going into Mortal Empires. So you'll have a very different experience, I think, playing as one of the old world races in Mortal Empires than you would playing in the old world. So there's a whole bunch of that stuff. Yeah.
I think we may look at start positions for the old Warhammer 1 races as well. We may split them up a bit. We'll see. No dates or anything like that.
No, and the thing is, you know, this is a living game. It's going to take us some more years to get to that final endpoint, if there ever is one.
Never.
And we're always looking to improve on what we do. We're always looking to update stuff. We listen very carefully to fan feedback. We're very, you know, we're on the forums all the time. So yeah, I mean, it's an evolving game. So we always look to do more effectively.
Okay. Well, sneaky second question is: would you be interested in having one grand storyline for all 3 games once you get to the end?
I think that's a possibility.
That'd be nice. Yeah.
I'd like that too.
I would be interested in that.
We're not announcing anything today.
Cool. Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Probably time for one more if anyone's anyone has any burning questions. Mario.
How are you doing? It's me. I was just wondering, you've obviously in the original game you introduced things like regiments of renown and additional...
Sorry, could you go into the mic a bit? It's
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Obviously, in the original game, you introduced things like regiments of renown and additional races. What could we expect from things like that in Warhammer 2? I mean, obviously, there's a couple of ideas of what might be coming.
Yeah. Well, rather like Warhammer 1, we'll be expanding it with new races, new DLC, new free content as well, in the same vein as you saw in the first game. So it will be expanding over time as Warhammer 1 did.
There will be regiments of renown for the Warhammer 2 races. I pretty much guarantee it.
Yeah, at the very least. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks very much.
Cool.
Welcome.
Okay.
Anyone else? Time for one last one? All right, thank you all very much for coming. Yeah, game's out next week. If you're going to go play it, have a great time. And thanks for having us.